I don't go to 12-step meetings really anymore. I go like once a year, unless somebody asks me to go to support them. So, but tonight I'm going to one. Tomorrow is my 21st anniversary, so it's kind of weird. I just noticed that here we are, going to be talking about recovery, and I have 21 years in like 6 hours or something like that. So
yeah, that's amazing, man. 21 years. Your sobriety is old enough to buy a drink.
This is my reader copy. Let me see if I can find it. I once had a dream I had to beat the devil. Literally. He was completely black, like a shadow, but also shiny and metallic. He had no features, just a solid mass of slick black nothingness, a moving hole of darkness. I felt him hunting me down. I felt his presence, and in the dream, the hairs on my arms stood at attention, and the pleasure of rising fear surrounded me until I was almost connected to the devil. Just inches away, the realization arose that I would be consumed by the devil if I could not think of how to beat him. He slithered around me, tall, thin, and wispy as if he were a cloak, the evil flecking off of him as if he were an active volcano. There was only one way to conquer him, but how? Knowing the devil communicates in riddles, I had to think quick. Let the answer come to me, and I knew it had to be obvious because evil is never that complicated. So I thought of my young daughter and all the love I had for her. I leaned in and I hugged the devil, and with that, the action of love, the evil from the devil melted away. I had beaten the devil.
What is your name?
My name is Bela Koe-Krompecher, and I don't know, really, I have, I guess, a lot of different hats. I'm a licensed independent social work and chemical dependency counselor. I'm an adjunct professor at the Ohio State University. I'm an author. I've had a record label. I'm a dad, all of that kind of stuff. So a lot of different things.
What is addiction?
Oh, it is interesting because I teach in one of the classes I teach several on substance abuse. Language is really important to me, and I think how we talk about things is very important in the words we use. I think addiction is a very stigmatizing word, so I usually try not to use it. Words outgrow their meanings or their usefulness, and I really feel that a lot of the driving forces for that behavior are subconscious, or I have a psychologist friend of mine who would say preconscious motivations that are very psychological and emotional. And I think that's sort of the driving force. So I try not to use the word addiction, but it's this compulsive maladaptive behavior is how I would phrase it.
Yeah, let's just kind of get into your story.
Sure.
Sure. However you feel like you want to share it.
Our experiences are a part of us. So I think it's really important to look at those things and to connect the dots. With my mom, she was married 5 times. When she was born into poverty. They had an outhouse in the sort of the Appalachian foothills of Ohio. And so she married this Hungarian guy who was displaced during World War II, who came here from Venezuela. Obviously didn't work out. I mean, they're incredibly different people. My maternal grandparents both died of cirrhosis, and we never talked about their drinking. And then you had these like Hungarian Venezuelans who just drank all the time as well. And we moved a lot. I went to 10 schools, a bunch in Ohio, in New York, and Virginia. I spent a lot of my, and I write about it in the book, I spent a lot of my childhood in Athens, Ohio, which is a college town. And then my mom uprooted us. She married a Methodist minister, and we moved to this really, really rural part of Ohio, which was a complete culture shock for me, coming from a college town, and I had lived in New York. And it was there that I really fell in love with alcohol, should I say? Because I was a anxious, nerdy kid. I was an outsider. I didn't know anybody who had my name. Very conservative place, town. I knew I didn't want to be like a lot of the kids I was around. I didn't want to be racist, and I didn't want to. My mom was a feminist, so that was always, important, to treat women with respect. I spent my freshman year basically alone with science fiction books and Kurt Vonnegut books and records and a lot of music biographies. And then, sophomore year, I'm like 14 years old or whatever, and we're at a barn party of all things, and I drank a couple Pabst Blue Ribbons, and I made everybody laugh. And I remember a couple girls were like, "I had no idea you were so funny." And so that was sort of my introduction. Alcohol was always there in my families, and my Hungarian grandmother would serve us port wine when I was 5, and she would put sugar in it. And way back when, I remember there was these Pabst cans that you could get. You could get Pabst and little tiny ones like this. And so when I was in 4th, 5th grade, my dad would give us these. We were allowed to have one. So I grew up with that, but it wasn't until I got drunk, right? And I was like, this works. I wasn't aware of any bad consequences of it, right? It provided a lot for me. It gave me a sense of community. It helped cut the anxiety I had. I remember shortly after that party, there was a girl, fairly cute girl in my class, came up to me and said, "I think you're really cute and funny. Maybe we can go out somewhere." And I was like, okay. I was like, okay. And then she said, "Don't tell anybody." But it gave me that. So yeah, I started drinking on the weekends. Back then, the drinking age, my freshman year was 18 years old. And then it turned 19. So it was really easy to get out alcohol. I looked older. I was usually the one my junior, senior year that could go into a carry out or a drive through and get the beer. One time I went to this 7-Eleven where I used to buy beer, and I tried to buy a Playboy, and she carded me. So I was like, I buy beer all the time. I just want to go home and masturbate. It's safer. So, I fell in love. My first sweetheart, Jenny May, who I write about in the book, she was a heavy drinker, and it was fun. And being interested in music, it was it just went hand in hand. I never got interested in drugs. I probably smoked weed less than 20 times and did cocaine once. Did not like that at all. Never did psychedelics. So it was just, I liked alcohol. I liked how it made me feel. I liked that it made me feel in control until finally at some point I wasn't. Going away to college, I went to a small liberal arts school in one of the suburbs, and Jenny went to Ohio State. I quickly dropped out, moved into her dorm room for the rest of the year, drank an enormous amount. We found our people. I started, working in record stores. I got a job at the biggest indie kind of cool store, and found my people, really. And eventually I became one of the co-owners of that store and did that for 17 years and promoted shows, have a record label. That whole DIY punk scene was so important to me because there was no hierarchy, right? Coming out of the 80s, 70s, and 80s, especially the 80s, like the, hair rock and Phil Collins and Lionel Richie, like people like Motley Crue now, like I found that incredibly oppressive. The kids that listened to that were bullies. And so that was, there was a big difference between like Motley Crue and that sort of, Cinderella or whatever the music was, to like REM and the Replacements and the Minutemen and the SST bands. That was such a drastic worldview that I experienced through music. And coming to Columbus on the High Street, I found that. And of course, being submerged in that culture, drinking was just a part of it. Drinking was as much a part of it as the music was, and the books we read and the movies we watched. And at some point for me, the music wasn't that important, and the drinking was. I had just relationship after relationship after relationship issues. The other thing that really forced me to look at it was I was incredibly suicidal. It was a very extremely real option for me. And I had a pretty severe attempt when I was 21. I made it to 33, and the worst day of my life, which was the day that I decided to quit drinking, that I needed to quit drinking. And it was an awful day. And like, even just thinking about it, it's like, I had basically destroyed my house. I had decided I was living in Gainesville with my now ex-wife, and had like gone to her job and said, this is over. We can't do this. And I'm done. And driving off and, going to a motel where I was going to plan on killing myself. And I was like, I'm going to try this sobriety thing, because what's the worst that can happen? I can try it for 6 months. And at the end of the 6 months, if nothing changes, I've got this other option. But then, things did happen, positive things. I quit drinking when I was 33. So you can do the math. I'm 54. Because of the type of drinker I was, which was a very social, I was a bar, pub drinker. That's what I like to do. So actually being around people in AA played to what I wanted, right? I wanted a community. And, once I heard their stories, it was like, oh, scratch under the surface of these folks who are all clean and wearing nice clothes and clothes that are washed was, some pretty gnarly stories, I guess. And I appreciated the humor. So, God, I probably went to like 400 meetings that first year and started really getting involved. I came back to Columbus to work and started sponsoring people, and kind of came to this realization, which I think a lot of folks do when they get into recovery, is, after a year or so, they want to help other people. So I went back to school for that at 35, and as a freshman, and I discovered too that I have a form of dyslexia, mathematical disorder, where I don't process numbers or symbols. I got diagnosed with ADHD, which is fairly common with alcohol users. And I got my bachelor's and my master's degree and started working in the field right away with homeless, mentally ill, substance abusers who were also caught up in the criminal justice system. I was around 15 years sober, and my marriage wasn't working. Even though we loved each other very much, it was obvious there were other things going on. And so I went back into therapy. And that first session, the psychologist who I see said, "Oh, well, you're right on course here." Because now you're discovering, after all of these things, what you did not touch on was all of the trauma and all of the attachment issues and those unconscious motivations. That was like really important for me to face that and to not run from it. And also realizing it was the sole reason why I drank, because of this core part of me that just was this lonely kid. As I got older and into middle age and had kids myself, like there was a lot of doubt about being an adult. And then the depression came in, and I had to face it. And again, you know, it's still something I live with. I deal with it pretty well. But I'm one way of dealing with it is I'm honest about it. Like I tell those close to me, I'm depressed, or I'm down, or I need a hug, or I need some reassurance. And learning how to ask for that, you know, in your 50s isn't really easy. And asking for it sort of in an authentic way, not in a desperate way. I really got involved in Eastern philosophy, those practices, and a lot of the readings that I still read. I mean, I'm reading a book now that I've probably read 4 times. So like continuing to learn, continuing to meditate, continuing to observe the urges I may have that want to take me a certain direction. And a lot of those urges too want me to be isolated, who want to tell me I'm not worthy of being loved, of getting compliments. I found another community through quit drinking. And I'm one of those rare folks that I went into treatment and I just never drank again. And it's a very, very small percentage of folks that do that. And yet that's the expectation, right? Which is fucking absurd. It's not like I have any really special traits about me that I'm, you know, air quotes, stronger than anybody. If looking at research of what helps people change is that I had the perfect dance card of what helps people change their behavior in a healthy way and quitting a substance. I had a loving wife. I had a family that were in Ohio that were supportive. I had insurance. I had a car. I had a driver's license. I didn't have a job. Like I could do recovery all the time. I'm white. I'm male. I'm straight. All of those factors, right? I had all of these opportunities that support recovery. So if my expectation is that if I did it, anybody can do it, I also have to say, does that person have all of these protective factors? I had every single one. Like it follows like what I was just talking about, what recovery capital is. The book is really, it's about two friends of mine who both died from substance abuse or causes, or their deaths were directly related to. My one friend, Jerry Wick, was in a band and he got killed on his bicycle, hit by a drunk driver, and he was also drunk riding his bike, dressed in black, carrying a pizza box at 3 a.m. He probably ran a red light on his bike and got hit. And then this woman, Jenny May, who was my high school sweetheart, who was a musician, and then due to her own substance abuse issues and her schizoaffective disorder, she was homeless for a long time in Columbus. So she ended up being a client where I worked. I did not work with her directly, but I would go out into the lobby to see my clients, and there would be Jenny. So this is about a period when she was homeless. Because 2008, after having spent a vast amount of time trying to tear our worlds down night by night, beer by beer, and note by note, I now spent my days trying to rebuild lives, sentence by sentence, listen by listen, and patience by patience as a social worker. My client base all had criminal backgrounds ranging from murder to drug possession to forgery. And as I strolled across the lobby, trying my best to let them know how I would help them all, I was open to their concerns. My mind busily balanced the different fires each person presented me with. 2 might need their bus pass and checks, one a bed at a shelter, one a scheduled therapy appointment, another assistance in filling out a government form. And I would get the bus passes and checks, see if the forms could wait an hour, and then counsel the other client. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Dale slumped in a corner chair with Jenny next to him. They had a brown bag at their feet, and his shoes were open at the end, his ruddy socks poking through the open flaps like small animals peering from a cave. He had no shoelaces, and Jenny waved at me, and I strolled over. She was not my client, and I let her know that I couldn't really talk to her here. She needed to speak with her own case manager, and she laughed. Man, they like you here. It's like you're Jesus or something. I cracked a smile. Yeah, touch the hem of his garment and a bus pass appears. She howled with laughter, and the laugh was too pressed, too much. My joke was not that funny. A smile lingered on her face, not from my one-liner, but from whatever was in the giant Wendy's Biggie cup in the brown bag. I unconsciously frowned at the cup, and Jenny shook her head, saying, "We have to hide it in something on the bus." Jenny, you aren't fooling anybody. Still shaking her head, she defiantly says, "I'm not trying to." Something I learned with her, what I could do with my life and what my hopes were very different than what she wanted. And in my process of really trying to help her and over the years and kind of being tortured by watching her decline, I learned to sort of accept that, of just that's the life. I don't even want to say that she chose, because I don't think people consciously choose misery, right? They may feel, like I said, like they deserve it. They may feel like that's all they have. They may actually be forced into conditions where that's their only option. But I realized that I loved her for who she was. And in some ways, I also loved her for who she was before. And I had a hard time liking who she had become because it was painful. So I read that because it sort of gave my attitude. Like, God, now, if I would have seen her now, I wouldn't have said anything about the alcohol. I wouldn't have, because why? You know, if she wanted to talk about it, she would have talked about it. So I think it's absurd that we expect people in therapy or especially substance abuse treatment to dive headfirst into this thing, and then to remind them of what is obvious is insulting. Unless a client invites me and wants me to challenge them, I have to be really careful, because I will challenge them if they keep talking about their alcohol or their meth use or whatever it is. You know, I will point out, well, like, what are you getting out of it? Or I might say, boy, you know, I really don't think you relapsed because you took 2 weeks off. Let's use real language around this and define what it is. You took a break from it. And they may say, well, I don't like it if you say that way. And I'm like, because here's the deal, because then you just keep saying, I keep relapsing, I keep relapsing. Then recovery isn't possible, because if you keep telling yourself you've relapsed 50 times, when really what you've done is take 45 breaks from it. And maybe you've only had 5 periods of your life where you've had over a month or 2 or 6 months of not using. So, you know, it's not, I don't do it in a shaming way, but in a realistic way, because our clients can handle the truth, because they're living their truth every day.
What is sobriety?
Well, I do think like I think sobriety is being sober. I think that's the real definition. So I'm not even a big fan of recovery, but I prefer that over sobriety, because I think sobriety it's a high benchmark. I like the idea that recovery is really about harm reduction. So I like harm reduction in the sense that even if we get sober, even if we want and achieve abstinence, we're still going to develop these relationships with, you know, food, with sex, with spending money, with fucking records, right? That can be maladaptive, that can be harmful to us, that avoid us from looking at things. Harm reduction is, how can I reduce the harm in my life by addressing these behaviors? I think the word sobriety is a clinical term, that if somebody wants that, then we work towards that. I think that's like a real dialogue. I actually say, if somebody says this works for me, okay, it works for you. And when it quits working for you, we'll talk about it. Where I sit philosophically and for my own life and what I want for other people, I don't want people to have to use any intoxicant. You know, I would like them to be able to take everything as it is. But I don't think I don't think there's a right or wrong in there, right? That's just what I would like. I wanted to be a drug and alcohol counselor. I didn't want to work with anybody with a mental illness. I worked for a guy who I loved to death, who was also sober for many years. But he said, you know, for some of us, like you and me, if they would have said, stand on your head and you won't ever drink again, we would have stood on our head every single morning. And that kind of stuck with me in the sense that we had the capacity to do something like that, right? And that some people just don't want to stand on their head. And they don't need to, right? Like if we're really going to be authentic about what we do in helping people, then we have to genuinely help them and accept them for who they are. And my feeling is if we don't do that, then we probably shouldn't be doing, I shouldn't do what I'm doing, because my job as a therapist, as a counselor, as a social worker is not to judge anybody. The reason why I drank, and the reason why I think people do abuse substances, misuse substances, is all about connection. That's all we want. We just want to feel connected. It's really like about my love of music, is because I feel connected when I listen to music. It takes me somewhere else. It centers me. It does all of those sorts of things. And looking at the complexities of why people use those motivations, so many subconscious and preconscious motivations to use to feel differently. And that feeling differently is really just to feel connected. So, out of that horrible day 21 years ago, I have 2 wonderful kids. I'm involved with somebody and have a lovely relationship. I can address my depression and my own, maladaptive behaviors. I write a lot. I paint. I didn't know if I could enjoy music again. And you can see behind me, I still, you asked me like if I like working at home, and yeah, I do, because I listen to music all day. I'm much more comfortable with myself. And hopefully that can carry over into the type of work that I do.
Hi, I'm Kenny Hill with Recovery Hill. My intention here is to show the diversity of sobriety. How one finds themselves clawing from bottom is as nuanced as their journey to bottom. Their situation in recovery has the potential to be highly relatable to somebody who is watching. Therefore, I offer the interviewees to have total freedom to express whatever has worked for them, whatever has helped them sustain sobriety. That said, here at the end of the interview, I want to make a quick request so that it wasn't to take away from the interview itself. This request is that you like and share the video. You can subscribe if you want, that's up to you, but at least like and share it so that the content can get to as many people as possible. There is a great capacity and potential for the story you just watched to be able to help out somebody else to begin their story of recovery.